Global Television Network.
Gunmen killed 6 and burned Catholic church in Burkina Faso attack. South Africa's African National Congress returns to office, but with a reduced majority. What lies ahead for the President, Cyril Ramaphosa? And the conflict in Libya enters another month with little prospect of a political settlement. Hello and welcome to CGTN. This is Africa Live and I'm Karen Roberts in Nairobi. Also coming up in the programme. In business, power supply disruption expected across Nigeria following a stalemate between unions and the state utility. And in sport, a dramatic final day of action in England as Manchester City are crowned Premier League champions. Authorities in Burkina Faso have launched investigations into an attack that left 6 people dead. Unidentified gunmen stormed a church in Dablo and killed a priest and 5 worshippers. The attack took place on the Catholic church in the northern Sant Mantenga province on Sunday morning. Witnesses say the gunmen arrived as the service began and opened fire on worshippers, killing the 6 people. A similar attack on a Protestant church last month left a priest and 4 worshippers dead. It's not yet known who is behind the spate of attacks. Dablo is known for its religious tolerance, and these attacks are seen as a wider move by jihadist groups to destabilize the Sahel region. Meanwhile, Burkinabe President Roch Kabore has received hostages released following a joint military operation led by France, the United States and Burkina Faso in the Sahel region. A total of 4 hostages were being held, including 2 French, 1 South Korean and 1 American citizen. The military operation resulted in the deaths of 2 soldiers from the French military. The identity of the kidnappers remains unknown. The Burkinabe Minister for Foreign Affairs has expressed a need for continued cooperation between his country and France, particularly on security issues in the Sahel.
But there's also the cooperation in terms of intelligence, and which therefore led to the success of this operation. We will continue to work together, to cooperate together, to intensify our relationship in this area of defense and security, so that we can reduce or eliminate the threat of terrorism in the Sahel.
Well, in recent years, Burkina Faso has been rocked by a series of attacks by jihadists. Security is a major concern in the country. In March 2017, 3 people were killed after 2 police posts in the north of the country were attacked. A few months later, in the same year, at least 18 people were killed when gunmen opened fire on customers seated outside a restaurant in the capital, Ouagadougou. Then, in March 2018, gunmen launched twin attacks in Ouagadougou against the French embassy and army headquarters. 8 security personnel and 8 attackers were killed in the fighting. In total, nearly 300 people have been killed in Burkina Faso in 4 years. During the same period, militants have also carried out a series of abductions. Well, now let's cross to CGTN's Deji Badmus, who is in Lagos for us. Deji, over 300 people killed in the past 4 years in Burkina Faso, numerous attacks launched by various armed groups. Has the country become a new base, would you say, for jihadists?
Well, look, it's really quite understandable. Burkina Faso shares a common border with Mali, and Mali, as you know, has been a very troubled country for a very long time. And then you have to look at the whole of the Sahel region. Very, very porous borders, not well policed. And then you look at the conflict in Libya as well, with the displacement of ISIL, of course, in Iraq and Syria. We've seen that quite a number of ISIL fighters now have actually relocated to Libya. And we've actually had quite a number of jihadist groups operating in the Sahel region. But what we're beginning to see is that they are now scaling up their attacks, scaling up their presence, especially after al-Baghdadi referenced the jihadis operating in that region in his last video. So it's a very serious issue. For Burkina Faso, it's serious because you have a country that is, I would say, has its own economic challenges. It does not have a very strong military. It does not have the capacity now to police its borders. And then the most important thing that is affecting the entire region is that the G5 Sahel force that was set up to actually combat terrorists in the region and try to stop these jihadis has actually not been up and running. I mean, of course, it's been able to carry out 1 or 2 operations, but the fact is that that G5 Sahel force has been bogged down by funding. So at the moment, you have a situation where it's like the countries in the Sahel region are just left on their own to fight this jihadist monster. And the fact is that unless they come together, unless they get that G5 Sahel force to begin to work very strongly, it's difficult to see how they're going to deal with this. It's true, we have about 4,000 French soldiers in the region, but then you still need the G5 Sahel force to come on stream to begin to work effectively. And of course, there's no question at all that the various countries that make up the Sahel region need to begin to spend a lot now on their military and of course on their intelligence gathering network.
Okay, thank you very much for that update. That was CGTN's Deji Badmus on Burkina Faso, reporting there from Lagos. Moving on to other news, to South Africa. The governing African National Congress President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially thanked the party's supporters for giving the party another term to govern. Hundreds of supporters and members gathered outside Luthuli House, that's the ANC headquarters, on Sunday afternoon to celebrate the party's triumph in the 2019 national general election. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela was there and she filed this report.
The governing ANC says this event is to show appreciation to their supporters and indeed all South Africans who came out in their numbers to cast their ballots and choose a government for the next 5 years.
ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa told these hundreds of people that the party heard the concerns of over 10 million people who voted for them in the election. Ramaphosa told a very excited crowd of supporters clad in ANC colours that the party was humbled by their support.
We are going to do what our people want us to do. We are going to do what our people have wished for. We are going to appoint men and women who are capable, who have great capability, who are visionaries, who are forward-looking, men and women who know their story.
Over the past few years, the African National Congress has come under intense public scrutiny as a result of corruption allegations against its leaders. The economy has also suffered somewhat during this period. Ramaphosa wants to change all that.
This is a new era, comrades. We are going to do things differently. We are going to do things effectively. We are going to make sure that we inject growth in our economy. We are going to make sure that we invite investors to come and invest.
Supporters urged their president to start the work immediately.
Oh, I'm so happy. I really want them to really work hard. We will vote for them again next time. I'm so happy ANC has won. I've voted for them since 1994. I love the organization. We just want jobs and houses. I'll never stop loving the ANC. We want him to work. We've seen so much that is not right with the leadership. He must please work.
The ruling party won 57.5% of the votes in the recent general elections, retaining power for the next 5 years. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, joining me now is Dr. Emmanuel Tambo. He is a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you very much for joining us. What does this election win mean for the ANC party?
Well, we have to look at how reduced their majority has been from 62% in 2014 to 57.5% in 2019. So that is quite an indictment on what the ANC has been embroiled in over the last decade. So President Cyril Ramaphosa has a Herculean task now of not only changing how government works, but then the face of the organization as well, because it is quite clear that he was actually more popular than the ANC, and that his election as ANC president in 2017 left a significant number of his fellow party members embittered.
Well, despite the reduced majority, this win is seen as a vote of confidence for President Cyril Ramaphosa. And he still faces a number of challenges as he sets out to form a new government. What would you say are the most pressing issues that he does need to address now?
There are three main issues that the new government faces. You have to reduce poverty, you have to reduce inequality, and then of course you have to reduce unemployment, especially amongst the youths as well. So those are some of the things. And then not only that, his party has been involved in a lot of dodgy scandals over the last 10 years. So those are some of the challenges that he faces as the party. But at a national level, you have to make sure that employment is reduced amongst the youths especially, and then of course poverty in rural areas most especially. So those are some of the immediate challenges facing his party. And it is quite encouraging that in the National Development Plan, that which is a framework for the ANC, those are some of the challenges that were pointed out, and we hope that is going to prove to be a catalyst in trying to make sure that the government surmounts those formidable challenges.
Well, quite a few challenges there. Let's talk about the EFF. It's made major inroads with black communities in this election. Moving forward, how does Ramaphosa champion non-racialism and issues regarding the majority African population?
Well, non-racialism has been the hallmark of South African politics, but whether or not it has been effective is another question. For now, they'll have to deal with the main issue, which is the issue of land, because it is land actually, and then its economic repercussions that divides South Africa across racial lines. So they have to make sure that they act on the issue of land effectively in a way that, of course, will satisfy the black majority who are landless, but at the end of the day, not frighten investors into precipitate withdrawal. And they will have to make sure as well that they retain the expertise of the white farmers as well. So it is a very difficult and balancing act, but with his credentials, from the time of from the role that he played in the run-up to the 1994 elections, we hope that he is going to play a very good and effective role in trying to make sure that he reconciles racial cleavages in South Africa, and land will be of utmost importance.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us with your analysis. That was Dr. Emmanuel Tambo there, a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Moving now on to Sudan, scores of demonstrators in central Khartoum are continuing their sit-in outside the Defence Ministry, and that's during the Muslim fasting month. CGTN's Laura Welabengo now reports.
These Sudanese protesters say they plan to continue their sit-in while fasting. They're locked in a standoff with the country's new military rulers and want the Transitional Military Council to hand over power to civilians.
We are happy with all our youth. These young men came from all over Sudan, from all provinces and all areas. They are here and they are suffering. All day they are here directly under the sun. There are no fans or shelters. No one comes to a place like this unless they have a case to defend, unless they have something to fight for and take back. They will be awarded with what is better.
The protesters are being supported by dozens of volunteers. Many have made their way to the capital to play their part in what they say is best for Sudan. Some women spend their day preparing the evening iftar meal, which marks the end of the fast.
We're standing with our children, the protesters, demonstrators and fighters. We're standing with them, standing to feed them and quench their thirst. As we stay up with them here all the way till morning. We stay up and stand with them so that they can find the strength to chant, to sleep, to have strong hearts.
After the sun has set and prayers come to a close, demonstrators pick up the pace. Despite the conditions, they are determined to stay put until their demands are met. Laura Walubengo, CGTN.
We are going to break now. Don't go away. Lots more to come, including the conflict in Libya continues for another month with little prospect of a political settlement. And Sweden reopens rape case against Julian Assange.
Data out of the country.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Perina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling.
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed.
And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
From Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The war in Libya continues as the Libyan National Army, led by General Khalifa Haftar, tries to enter the capital, Tripoli. The internationally recognized government, headed by Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj, is based inside Tripoli and is resisting the attacks by the army. Here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim with the latest.
A flurry of meetings in the region. General Khalifa Haftar has just ended a 3-day visit to Cairo following a tour to Europe. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi had commended Haftar's military operation as a war on terrorism.
From the beginning of the conflict, Egypt has been keen on uniting the Libyan political forces and the army to preserve stability in the country. However, they are still divided. Egypt's main concern is to fight terrorism and extremism in the region, especially now that ISIL is still at large in the south of Libya. Egypt is supporting the efforts of the Libyan National Army to combat extremists.
Haftar's arch-foe, Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj, has also returned from a trip to Europe. He tried to convince Western powers to force Haftar for a ceasefire, but to no avail. On the battlefront, the Libyan National Army has announced a change of tactics by targeting the coastal city of Sirte. From there, the army will try to push into Tripoli from the northeastern route.
The LNA is now trying to infiltrate from different sides of the capital, north and south. The presence of civilian population slows down the process to avoid the loss of lives. It's like a war of attrition. The LNA is trying to pull the militias out of the capital by cutting off all supplies to them. This tactic obviously prolongs the war.
The escalation in Libya in the last few weeks have reduced any hope of a peaceful settlement soon. Major political forces have refused to change their policies to accommodate any agreement. Thus, the war in Libya is inevitable to continue for the foreseeable future. Yas Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The humanitarian organization Sea-Watch is accusing Libya of violating international law. The German organization says Libya's Coast Guard violated international law when officers boarded the Gibraltar-registered Vos Triton. At least 3 migrants had sought refuge on the offshore tugboat and were reportedly removed. In a video distributed by the German organisation, a Sea-Watch member aboard the organisation's Moonbird light plane is heard urging the Voss Triton crew to rescue a person swimming towards their ship and not to hand him to the Libyan Coast Guard. South Sudanese people have been expressing mixed reactions to the delay in forming a new government. CGTN's Patrick Hoyt now reports.
The wait for formation of a new government in South Sudan continues. The more than 2 million South Sudanese refugees who are in the other East African countries due to war in their country are still unable to return home. South Sudan's security situation remains unpredictable. A unity government comprising all political groups previously scheduled to be formed this month is now postponed until November this year.
We are extending so that you don't lose more lives. We are extending so that we avoid going back to war. We are extending because we want to ensure that the security arrangements are completed and everything is set in place so that we avoid the issue of the two armies.
Residents of South Sudan's capital, Juba, have been expressing their views on the delay in forming a new government.
On the violence, the corruption, whatever the government is doing, still on. There's no difference. Actually, if these 6 months is not added, some of these things could have come and stopped. But now, on these 6 months things, which means we are going to have still more killing, the security kind of thing. People are not safe.
Let the government make sure that the security is arranged well, and 2, let all the army be under one command. So there will be respect because the command will come from one person. So that to avoid that mistake of 2016.
In 2016, a poorly arranged security sector led to clashes between forces loyal to President Kiir and the then Vice President and opposition leader Riek Machar in South Sudan's capital, Juba. The fighting took place 2 months after Riek Machar had returned to South Sudan. Everyone here is concerned about security situation in the country, but how it should be handled is where people differ. The East African regional body, IGAD, is urging the South Sudanese people to continue having hope while it works to bring peace back to the country. Patrick Oyet, CGTN, Juba, South Sudan.
A new study by the International Finance Corporation says the private sector can use its assets to improve support for refugees and host communities to be self-sufficient. Findings by the IFC suggest there are alternative ways for private sector companies to support the more than 70 million forcibly displaced people globally.
Wars, violence and persecution have forced millions of people to flee their homes. Many have found refuge in camps around the world.
The last time I visited Syria was in 2014 after finishing high school. I wanted to continue my education and go to university in Syria, but I couldn't because of the situation. So I registered as a refugee because of the crisis, but I still hope to return to the country and get my master's degree there.
A study conducted by the International Finance Corporation examined more than 170 private sector initiatives focused on refugees and host communities in Africa and the Middle East. Data was collected on business ownership, access to finance, telecommunications, education and employment. The findings show that opportunities from private sector investment can promote self-reliance, financial independence and empowerment of refugees.
To a large extent, particularly when you go into protracted refugee situations where people have been there living in camps or similar areas for years and sometimes for decades, just relying on a purely humanitarian care and maintenance approach that provides goods and services to refugees and considers them as passive receivers is probably not a sustainable solution.
Syrian refugees living in Jordan have benefited from opportunities provided to them at the camps. Ihab Kawati is one of them. Through an education program here, he has managed to learn and has become a full-fledged web developer and an entrepreneur.
IPKT Argo is a youth initiative primarily aimed at directing youth capabilities towards innovation using modern technology like internet and artificial intelligence. At the same time, we teach them how to transform ideas into pioneering projects. To be able to help the refugees in the long term, we must provide them with tools and show them how they can use the new digital tools to solve the problems they face. This can enable them to develop their own projects, which could generate a good income for them in the future.
IFC hopes its study will raise awareness across key private sector areas and continue to show that a market opportunity exists to help address challenges faced in refugee camps. Thuli Shabalala, CGTN.
To international news now. Swedish prosecutors have announced that they will reopen an investigation into a rape allegation made against WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange. The inquiry has been revived at the request of the alleged victim's lawyer. Assange, who has denied the charges, avoided extradition to Sweden for 7 years after seeking refuge at the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012. But the 47-year-old was evicted last month and sentenced to 50 weeks in jail for breaching his bail conditions. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi begins a 2-day visit to Russia today. This evening, he's scheduled to meet with his Russian counterpart, Sergei Lavrov, in Sochi. The two are expected to firm up details on President Xi Jinping's Russia trip next month, which includes the annual St. Petersburg International Economic Forum. The two top diplomats will brief the media after their talks. US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo will be in Brussels on Monday to discuss Iran and other issues with European officials before heading to Russia. Pompeo cancelled the Moscow leg of his Russia trip. He'll still meet his counterpart Sergei Lavrov and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Sochi on Tuesday. Iran is expected to top the agenda at the high-level talks. They'll also cover issues like arms control, the DPRK, Ukraine and Venezuela. The visit comes after calls for unity over the weekend by Iranian President Hassan Rouhani. He asked the country's political factions to come together in the face of unprecedented US pressure.
Chirping of birds, sounds of whispering trees, burbling of streams. When sunlight sets the forest's leaves aglow and waterfall surges down from the mountain, we see and hear the Earth's wondrous beauty. The Earth is meant to be appreciated, and the life of its inhabitants deserves our endless exploration. Come with CGTN to listen and see, in chorus of life, to marvel at nature and life.
recap of our top stories now. Authorities have launched investigations into an attack in Burkina Faso that left 6 people dead. Unidentified gunmen stormed a church in Dablo and killed a priest and 5 worshippers. The attack took place on the Catholic church in the northern San Matenga province on Sunday morning. Witnesses say the gunmen arrived as the service began and opened fire on the worshippers, killing the 6 people there. A similar attack on a Protestant church last month left a priest and 4 worshippers dead. South Africa's governing African National Congress President Cyril Ramaphosa has officially thanked the party's supporters for giving the party another term to govern. Hundreds of supporters and members gathered outside Lutuli House, that's the ANC headquarters, to celebrate the party's triumph in the 2019 national general election. President Ramaphosa is under pressure to drop ministers implicated in wrongdoing when he assembles his new trimmed-down cabinet. The war in Libya continues as the Libyan National Army, led by General Khalifa Haftar, tries to enter the capital, Tripoli. The internationally recognized government, headed by Prime Minister Fayez Sarraj, is based inside Tripoli, and he's resisting the attacks by the army. Both rivals have been holding a flurry of meetings to garner support and seem unwilling to change their stance to accommodate any agreement. To Swedish prosecutors now, they have announced that they will reopen an investigation into a rape allegation made against WikiLeaks co-founder Julian Assange. The inquiry has been revived at the request of the alleged victim's lawyer. Assange, who has denied the charges, avoided extradition to Sweden for 7 years after seeking refuge at the Ecuadorian embassy in London in 2012. But the 47-year-old was evicted last month and was sentenced to 50 weeks in jail for breaching his bail conditions. And those are the top stories that we're covering for you. We have all the business news coming up for you after the break, including power supply disruption expected across Nigeria following a stalemate between unions and the state utility. And pressure mounts on President Ramaphosa to name a lean cabinet days after election victory.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Trouble looms in Nigeria's power sector following plans by employees of the National Distribution Company to go on strike. The Trade Union Congress has warned of a nationwide shutdown of the country's national electricity grid starting today, Monday. The union is accusing managers at Transmission Company of Nigeria of mistreating its members. The union has asked consumers to seek alternative power sources until the stalemate is resolved. The transmission company, however, has described the move as ill-intentioned, stressing that it was wrong for the Labour Union to claim that there was industrial disharmony in the transmission company. The company denies claims by the unions. Well, continuing in Nigeria, President Muhammadu Buhari has nominated the Central Bank of Nigeria Governor Godwin Emefiele for a second term in office. Emefiele was first appointed by former President Goodluck Jonathan in 2014. However, his renomination has generated mixed reaction within the nation's financial sector. CGTN's Kelechi Emekalam has the details.
We feel that having consistently been in positive trajectory for growth in the last 5 to 6 quarters.
Emefiele's reappointment was read in a letter from the presidency to the Senate. It will be his second and final term in office as central bank's governor, making him the first governor since 1999 to serve 2 terms. His nomination is subject to parliamentary approval.
He came in
when the economy was in a very bad shape and plunged into recession through no fault of the central bank, but because of the weak economic structure that we have. So he now battled with a very strong team at this central bank to give macroeconomic leadership to this country. And that leadership was strong, it was efficient, it was effective.
Emefiele is known for sustaining Nigeria's monetary policy stance at 14% for over 2 years and is credited for controlling Nigeria's inflation from heights of about 22% to 11%. Despite this, he's criticized by some Nigerians and foreign investors for introducing multiple exchange rates.
You may have issues about the monies being borrowed, what are they being borrowed for? They may not actually be borrowed to go to production. They may be borrowed for consumption, in which case inflation will spiral out of control. Are you with me? So the second option is to tighten the monetary policy, but then find some ways of delivering credit to the private sector.
But what is likely to define Godwin's next term in office?
He has started reining in the commercial banks, for example, by promoting risk-based supervision. Now that's very important, because if you look at all the troubles we have in our banking sector, it's always about their risk management.
Governor Emefiele, among other things, is credited for striking the currency swap deal between Nigeria and China, maintaining policies that helped ease Nigeria's economy out of recession, and sustaining a policy of injecting billions of dollars into the market to ease the pressure on the scarce currency. Kelechi Amekalam, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Over to South Africa now, where the Johannesburg Stock Exchange got off to a mixed start on Monday after the ANC maintained its majority in South Africa's elections. Gains were expected with a handful of financial results due. Vodacom Group, Astral Foods, Octodic Investments and Robex are all expected to announce their earnings. Even though the ANC's victory with 57.5% of the vote was less resounding, the margin is seen as wide enough to strengthen President Cyril Ramaphosa's hand as he seeks to stamp out corruption and revive the economy. Pressure is on for him to unveil a downsized cabinet to signal that the government is serious about cutting spending. South Africa's cabinet is one of the largest in the world. It had 16 ministers in 1996, but has since ballooned to 34, with 37 deputy ministers. South Africa's mobile phone operator Vodacom has reported a 6.6% drop in full-year earnings. The group's headline earnings per share for the full year ended in March and fell to 862 cents from 923 cents a year earlier. Its full-year dividend was reduced to around $0.56 a share from $0.57 previously, partly because new shares were issued as part of its BEE deal. Vodacom, which is majority owned by Vodafone, concluded a broad-based black economic empowerment ownership deal last September, which saw it issue additional shares. The network company is currently concluding the acquisition of the M-Pesa brand and platform-related assets from Vodafone through a joint agreement with Kenyan telco giant Safaricom. China and the US have not concluded a trade deal yet, as many in the markets had hoped for. In an interview with Fox News, the head of the US National Economic Council, Larry Kudlow, said that the escalating trade dispute between the two powerhouses is harming both sides.
A major setback for the trade talks between China and the US. Until last week, there were expectations that the two countries would strike a deal before the G20 summit in June. However, a tariff war is reignited with the US increasing tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods. US President Donald Trump believes the US Treasury was benefiting from these massive payments by China. But Larry Kudlow, who heads the US National Economic Council, admits that this is not exactly the case.
Because the president says it pays the tariffs. They may suffer consequences, but it's U.S. businesses and U.S. consumers who pay, correct?
Yes, to some extent. I don't disagree with that. Again, both sides will suffer on this.
Despite the setbacks in the negotiations, China and the U.S. are still prepared to continue talking.
The talks will continue, and I will say this, there's a G20 meeting in Japan toward the end of June next month. The chances that President Trump and President Xi will get together at that meeting are probably pretty good.
For that, China suggests both sides should deal with the trade war with utmost rationality. But China is fully prepared to fight one.
If the U.S. increases tariffs, we must respond. We surely hope that the U.S. side will adopt a restrained attitude, and the Chinese side will also do so as to avoid an infinite escalation.
Liu He says what China wants is a trade deal that's equal and respects the dignity of both sides. There are some key disparities to close, but it must address the country's core concerns.
The Egyptian government has begun implementing its new Electronic Payment Act. Civilians are now required to pay government fees, taxes and services electronically. The new system is part of a broader drive to boost financial inclusion in the North African nation. CGTN's Yasser Hakim explains.
Cash payments are slowly becoming a thing of the past. Starting May, payments for government services such as taxes, tariffs, driving licenses or such have become electronic rather than cash.
Direct financial payments with state employees has opened a lot of corruption and bribery. The new system prevents direct involvement with employees, so it reduces corruption cases. It also facilitates procedures for civilians and kills red tape, and you can pay attention at any bank or ATM machines.
It's an unfamiliar territory for most Egyptians.
I think it will save a lot of time and avoid standing in long queues to pay or face theft attempts when you have cash. We just need to understand how to use bank services and credit cards to avoid issues.
It's a good idea, but we need to upgrade the electronic system because it breaks down a lot, and we need protection from hackers on our accounts for it to be a success.
To facilitate the procedures, the central bank has ordered banks in the country to issue special debit or credit cards for free.
This will raise the financial inclusion rates as many Egyptians will have to open accounts, though I believe the infrastructure needs to improve to accommodate the potential growing number of new clients.
Only 16 million out of the 100 million Egyptians use banking services. The government is targeting up to 50 million in the next 3 years. With the procedures for the cashless economy underway, the government says it's also targeting the education and health sectors before the end of the year, followed by the rest of the economy in 2020 and 2021. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
We're taking a short break now. Don't go away, lots more to come, including Egypt's rebounding tourism sector threatens the incredible sea life of the Red Sea coral reef.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
A marine and land conservation group in Egypt has said that recovery in its tourism industry is endangering the Red Sea's coral reefs. According to the Red Sea province, roughly 1,700 tourist boats operate along the coast. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more on this story.
The tourism industry has witnessed an increase of over 50% in visitors in the last 2 years. A majority of tourists have been heading to the beaches to enjoy the sun and underwater excursions, such as diving and snorkeling. The revival of tourism is positive, but preserving the coral reefs and underwater environment would guarantee a sustainable inflow of tourists and revenue for the longer term for the economy. According to the Ministry of Environment, the Red Sea has more than 2,600 types of coral reefs. However, the UN says 70% of coral reefs worldwide are endangered, and it's not different at the Red Sea.
There are several harmful behavior by some tourists and companies, such as taking out pieces of the reefs, fishing inside the areas or throwing the anchors in reefs, as well as littering and polluting the corals. All these behaviors damage and kill the reefs and should be stopped.
Experts have previously accused officials of not giving enough protection to coral reefs. But a number of environmentalist organizations have been set up in the Red Sea resort cities to combat maltreatment of reefs by thousands of divers and boats every year.
The punishment for damaging reefs is very stringent, but unfortunately, it's hard to monitor the thousands of tourists by authorities. There must be warning signs around the reef areas to indicate their locations and to remind the tourists of the importance of protecting these reefs.
An extensive awareness campaign is also underway in all resorts. The aim is to ensure visitors can preserve the remarkable coral reefs so that they can enjoy it for decades to come. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Now, Nigeria has many national monuments, but they don't seem to attract the attention that they deserve. Here's CGTN's Deji Badmus with a look at one of Nigeria's most iconic but neglected buildings, the National Stadium in Lagos.
It used to be called Nigeria's Sports City and the home ground of the country's national football teams. It's hosted some of the most memorable sporting events in Nigeria's history, among them the 1973 edition of the All-Africa Games and the 1980 Africa Cup of Nations, which the country won for the very first time. Kunle Sholaja was there when it happened.
It was a glorious moment. The atmosphere was electrifying. The then president was there, Alhaji Shehu Shagari. He was even the cheerleader, holding the rattler and cheering the Super Eagles, or the Green Eagles as they were called then. Those are fine memories that one really have about the Lagos National Stadium.
Those were the good old days. The Lagos National Stadium is now a very dark shadow of what it once was. The pitch of the main bowl is in a bad shape. The racetracks are gone. The floodlights are all dead, with virtually all the bulbs falling off. And the electronic scoreboard simply a standing relic. The roof of the covered arena is giving way. Most of the seats have disappeared, and the ones still in place are old and outdated. The National Stadium is in a complete state of dilapidation. No national sporting event takes place here anymore. And the last time the senior national football team, the Super Eagles, played a match here was way back in 2004.
It's unimaginable that a stadium of that capacity, a stadium that was competing as one of the best in the world at the time it was constructed in 1972, when it was commissioned December 4, 1972, could be in that same state now, in such a state of disrepair.
It's a tragedy. I'm not exaggerating here. It's a complete tragedy that the nation, that the national team and the national stadium is the way it is, and everybody is just they don't care. They don't understand what it means.
The 55,000 capacity multi-purpose stadium, when it was originally built, comprises an Olympic-sized swimming pool, spaces for basketball, boxing, tennis, and several other sports. The capacity was later reduced to 45,000 in 1999 for a FIFA tournament. But since 2004, no national tournament has taken place here because of the poor state of the facility. The Lagos state government has been pressing the federal government to hand over the facility to it so it could rehabilitate and run it. But for some political reasons, the central government has not done so.
It is obvious the federal government cannot maintain that stadium. It is obvious even the state government may not be able to maintain it. It is better that stadium is concessioned out to people who can really make use of it, maintain it, and sustain it.
While both sides engage in a back-and-forth negotiation, Nigeria's port city continues to rot away. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's begin the sport